Hi there, today I'm going to try to explain the situation regarding the European Bouldering Championships. And I'm guessing many of you don't know much about the issue, so I'm going to start at the beginning. This year nobody wanted to organize the European Bouldering Championships. The IFSC didn't find any organizer who was willing to, organize the event. So they decided to use the last World Cup, Munich, that's going to take place next week, as the European Bouldering Championships. The idea looks pretty simple. At the end of the competition, you just look at the ranks of the Europeans, and the European who ranks highest is the European champion. Pretty simple. It is pretty simple as long as you have just one qualification group. Because with just one qualification group, everyone is climbing on the same boulders, therefore you can compare the results and create the ranking. But in Munich you always have two qualification groups because there are a lot of climbers there. It's usually the biggest event of the year. And some smart people noticed that with two qualification groups, there's potential for some unfairness and some really weird situations. When you have two groups, there's no way to compare the scores and the ranks of those two groups, because those groups climb on different boulders. So the difficulty is not the same. 4 tops in Group A may be the same as 2 tops in Group B. There's no way to know, so they simply don't compare the scores. And you cannot compare the ranking because you are competing against different climbers. So for instance, this may happen, and this is a scenario that will be really weird. I don't think it has ever happened, but it's not impossible. Let's imagine that in Munich, no European makes semis. No European is in the top 10 of either group. In that case, there's no way to know who's the European champion, because you have a first European in Group A, who may be, let's say, in 12th place, and a first European in Group B, who may be, let's say, in 11th place. Who's the champion? The guy in Group B because he's 11th? Well, that didn't depend on him. He beat all the Europeans in his group, but he's 11th simply because all the non-Europeans ahead of him. If you remove the non-Europeans, they are both in first place in the European ranking. So we cannot compare the results, we cannot compare the rankings. We don't know who's the European champion. Also, what happens if just Europeans from one of the groups make it to semis? Let's imagine that the first European in Group A is in 11th place out of semis, but the first 7 Europeans in Group B make it to semis. Well, this means that the guy in Group A, the first European in Group A, is gonna be 8th in the European Championship ranking, no matter what. But the guy in 7th place, the 7th European in Group B, can potentially be European champion, despite the fact that he was beat in the qualification round by another 6 Europeans. So the guy in Group A beat every single European he was allowed to compete against, but he cannot be European champion. Whereas the guy in Group B, who's 7th, was beat by 6 Europeans in the qualification round, but still can climb in semis, and if he makes it to the final, can win the final and be the European champion. That's really unfair for the guy in Group A, because he didn't have any chance of competing in the semis and potentially make it to finals and potentially winning the competition in the European Championship. He beat every single European, but still he's gonna be 8th. Whereas the 7th guy in Group B was beat by 6 Europeans, but still can make it to the final and win the championship. Some people notice this potential for weird situations and potential for unfairness. And well, apparently, according to a letter written by Jorg Verhoeven, who's one of the members of the Athletes Commission, they raised this issue with the IFSC, and well, apparently the IFSC did pretty much nothing. So Verhoeven wrote a post on Facebook, and well, through this post, a lot of people and a lot of climbers became aware of this situation. And then the IFSC felt some pressure, so they talked with the national federations about maybe, well, do you want to go ahead with this format, or maybe you want to cancel the European Championships? And apparently the national federations would rather have this, I'm going to call it unfair European Championship, rather than not having a European Championship. Also, the IFSC is in that same boat apparently. Why is it that they would rather have an unfair competition rather than no competition? My guess, and this is just my guess, is that it will look really bad in the eyes of the Olympic Committee if climbing wouldn't have a European Championship. Suddenly this discourse of climbing being ready for prime time and climbing growing fast and climbing having a lot of fans all over the world, and suddenly we cannot organize a European Championship, that wouldn't look too good. Also, the national federations could potentially lose some funding, because I'm guessing that, again, climbing wouldn't look as serious as a sport if we suddenly cannot organize a European Championship. So given that we were going to have a European Championship no matter what, the Athletes Commission proposed a change in the format. We're going to have a normal World Cup, because it would be unfair to change the World Cup format just for this event. I mean, all the non-Europeans shouldn't be affected by this incapacity of the European IFSC or whatever it is, whoever's responsible for finding an organizer for this event. The non-Europeans shouldn't be affected by this situation. So we're going to have a normal World Cup, but the top 10 Europeans of each qualification group are going to be allowed to compete on the semi-final problems, even if they don't make semi-finals. So the Europeans who make semi-finals are going to compete in the semi-finals as if this was a normal World Cup, nothing special. But after the semi-finals, the top 10 Europeans of Group A who didn't make semis and the top 10 Europeans of Group B who didn't make semis are going to climb on those semi-final problems. And the final European ranking is going to be decided by those results from the semi-final round. So after the semi-final round, we're going to know who's the European champion. And we're going to have a podium and medals and the whole thing before the final. Right after the semi-final, we will crown our European champions. And then the World Cup will go on as usual. There's potential for some really weird things happening. For instance, we may have a European champion, let's say Janja Gambret, and then a World Cup champion, let's say Shona Coxie. And Shona Coxie can win the World Cup but not the European champion. Or we may have a climber that flashes every single problem in the semi-final but cannot climb in semis because he initially didn't make semis. So there's potential for some weird situations, but I think this format is much better than the original. There's still some potential for unfairness. For instance, the qualification groups, are created based on the world ranking. And someone made the calculation, someone in 8a.nu, and I will put a link in the description, calculated that the top 20 Europeans, 12 of them are going to be in one group and 8 of them in the other group. So one of the two groups is going to be harder than the other. It's going to be easier to make semis, or top 10 at least, in one of the groups. So it's not perfect, this system. Ideally, we should have a separate event. But since that wasn't happening, I think this is an acceptable compromise, let's call it. So I hope you understand the situation now, and I hope you understand what's going to happen in Munich. Again, the top 10 Europeans of each group are going to compete in the semi-final problems, even if they don't make semi-finals. The ones who make semi-finals will compete in the semi-finals normally, and the rest will compete on the same problems after the round. And we're going to crown the European champions right after the semi-finals. It's going to be a podium and medals and all the stuff. If you have any questions or doubts, please leave a comment. I will try to reply to every single one of them. And also, let me know your opinion. Do you think this is a good solution? Can you think of a better system, a better format to solve this issue? Or would you rather cancel the European Championships? I don't know, because I don't have enough information or what would be the consequences for the sport and for the federations of canceling the European Championships. But I think it's really sad that we cannot find an organizer for the European Championships. That's a topic for another day. How come that nobody wants to organize these events? How come that it is so hard to find someone willing to organize this? In my mind, there should be, a line of people willing to organize this, but that's not the case. And that's a complex topic for another day. And it is an issue that the IFSC should address, because it's a serious issue when you cannot find an organizer for such an important event. I think I covered it all. Again, if you have some questions, leave it in the comments. And if you're new here and for some reason you find these obscure topics interesting, make sure you subscribe and I will see you in the next one. Thank you so much for watching and take care.